I am 71 years old and my name is Kenneth Rogers. I watched Wayne Butler stand up in my own living room and open a binder older than my son's wedding invitations. Crystal Klein was still talking when he stood, telling me the guardianship was as good as decided, telling me to sign my accounts over and make this easy on everyone before the wedding. I did not sign anything. I just looked at Wayne, and Wayne started reading. To understand why that room went quiet, you have to go back further than that. Back past the papers and the petition, back to a cold morning in January, and a hole in the ground on a hill outside Rock Hill, South Carolina. I am 71 years old, and my name is Kenneth Rogers. I spent 48 years pouring concrete and laying block for Rogers Masonry and Concrete, a company I built out of a used mixer and a pickup truck in 1978. The house on Millhouse Road is paid off. It used to be full. It got quiet in January when I buried my wife of 46 years, and I have been learning the size of that quiet ever since. If you are watching this and you have buried someone too, tell me the city you are watching from. I would like to know who is sitting with me tonight. Rose and I married in 1979, back when I had nothing but a strong back and a line of credit nobody wanted to give me. She kept the books before we could afford a bookkeeper. She kept the garden after we could afford anything we wanted. Tomato steaks in June, a row of zinnias along the fence, and every spring she'd stand out there with her hands on her hips like she was inspecting a job site. I used to tell her she'd have made a fine foreman. She'd tell me somebody had to keep an eye on me. We had one son, Jeremy, born in 1985. Good boy. Soft, though, in a way that used to worry Rose more than it worried me. He never once in his life told a person no to their face. He'd rather carry a weight quietly than set it down where somebody could see him struggling with it. I loved him for his gentleness, and I worried about it too, the same way you worry about a beam that looks fine until you know what's leaning on it. In 2010, Rose and I sat down with Wayne Butler, an old friend and a good lawyer, and we put the house and our savings into a living trust, standard business for people our age. I knew going in that the house sat inside that trust, and not in anybody's name, outright, mine included. Not really, not the way people think of owning a house. I understood the shape of it. What I didn't understand, what I'd let myself forget over 16 years of nothing going wrong, was every last word Wayne had written into it. A man forgets the fine print on a document he never expected to need. Jeremy met a woman named Crystal Klein in 2023 at a friend's barbecue, and by December of last year, he'd proposed. Rose knew about the engagement before she died. She told me Crystal seemed like a woman who measured a room before she sat down in it. I told her she was probably just nervous meeting the family. Rose gave me a look I'd seen 1,000 times over 46 years, the one that meant I was being generous with somebody who hadn't earned it yet. She was right about that too. She usually was. Rose passed in January, 69 years old, and I buried her on a morning so cold the ground crew had to run a torch along the edge of the grave before they could get a clean line with the shovel. I stood there in a coat that used to fit different, back when there were two of us wearing coats in that house, and I did not say much to anybody. Jeremy stood beside me the whole service. Crystal stood beside him. Within the week, Crystal was in my kitchen rearranging the cabinets. I came downstairs one morning, maybe 4 days after the funeral, and found her switching the coffee mugs to a lower shelf. Told me it would be easier on me. I said thank you and left it alone because grief makes a man slow to pick fights over cabinet doors, and because I figured a little fuss from a young woman trying to be useful wasn't worth the breath. That was my mistake, if you want to call it that. I read it as kindness first. I always do. Rose used to say that was my one weak joint, reading kindness into people before I'd checked their work. By the end of January, there were pamphlets fanned out on my kitchen counter for a place called Cedar Grove Senior Living. Full-color brochures, a woman my age smiling over a puzzle table, a little card clipped to the front with pricing. I never asked for those. I picked them up, looked at every page like I was reading a bid I hadn't requested, and set them in a drawer instead of the trash, because even then some part of me wanted a record of who'd left what where. Just thought you should have options, Dad, Crystal told me when she noticed the pamphlets had moved. She called me Dad before Jeremy had put a ring on her hand and before I'd said she could. I noticed that too, filed it next to the pamphlets. In February, she told me she'd handle my mail so I wouldn't have to think about it. Small thing, considerate, on its face. A few weeks later, I got a notice from the post office confirming a forwarding request I never filed. My statements and correspondence rerouted through an address that turned out to be Crystal's apartment. I called down there and asked the clerk to explain it to me plainly, and she read me back a form with my name signed on it in handwriting that was not mine. I didn't raise my voice. I asked her to cancel it and to note in their system that I'd never authorized it. Then I hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a while, the way you sit still after you've heard a truck engine make a sound it shouldn't make, listening for whether it does it again. That's when Karen Klein, Crystal's mother, came by with a casserole dish and a great deal of sympathy. Karen runs a business called Graceful Transition Senior Solutions, helping families downsize elderly relatives out of houses too big for them. I knew that going in, Jeremy had mentioned it proudly at some point. His future mother-in-law, helping old folks get settled somewhere safer. She sat at my table, told me how sorry she was about Rose, told me grief was the hardest thing a body carries. All true things, said the way a man says true things, right before he asks you to sign something. Then she walked my downstairs rooms, with her eyes moving in straight lines, corner to corner, the way I used to walk a job site before I quoted it. She wasn't grieving with me, she was pacing off square footage. I've stood in enough rooms with contractors and appraisers to know exactly what that walk looks like from across a kitchen. A woman measuring a house is not a woman comforting a widower, whatever casserole she's carrying. I didn't say anything to her about it. I refilled her coffee and let her talk about her business, how tough it had gotten these last couple years, how families just don't plan ahead the way they used to. She said it like a complaint. I heard it like a motive. Jeremy, for his part, was somewhere in the middle of all this, the way he'd always been in the middle of things, agreeable, absent, trying to keep two women happy without ever quite standing anywhere himself. He'd stop by some evenings, sit with me on the porch, ask how I was holding up. Those visits were the only honest hour in most weeks. He missed his mother. I could see it plain on him, the same way I could see he wasn't going to be the one to stop what was building around me. I want to be fair here. Jeremy never once suggested I belonged in a place like Cedar Grove. He never signed a mail form with my name on it. Whatever came later, that part wasn't him, not at the start. But a man who lets other people build a case in his house is still living inside the case they're building, whether he reads the file or not. The year before, back in 2025, I'd set Jeremy up with what the bank calls convenience access on the joint bill pay account, so he could help me keep up with Rose's medical bills when there'd been a stretch of appointments that needed handling fast. That access was still sitting there in February and March, unused as far as I knew, a spare key I'd cut for a season that had already passed. I hadn't thought to take it back. Why would I? My son had never given me a reason to count that key twice. Every Sunday since Rose died, I'd made a habit of sitting at the kitchen table, after church with a cup of coffee and going through the household accounts, same as she and I used to do together at that same table for 46 years. Some weeks there was nothing to look at but a light bill and a grocery total. It kept my hands steady, having a number in front of me I understood. It kept the house feeling like mine, even with half the rooms gone quiet. That March, a Sunday came where the numbers didn't line up. I want you to picture an old man sitting at a kitchen table with a coffee going cold, looking at a screen he's looked at 100 Sundays before, and this time seeing a balance that made no sense at all. That's where the trouble actually started to show its face. But before I tell you what that screen said, you should know I already had my suspicions warming up in the back of my mind. The pamphlets, the mail, Karen's careful walk through my downstairs rooms. A man who's poured enough concrete learns to feel a crack coming before it opens all the way through the slab. I set my coffee down. I opened the account, and I started counting. I counted twice because a man doesn't trust a number the first time it scares him. The bill pay account, the one Jeremy had a key to, was sitting at less than $400. It should have been carrying better than $11,000, easy, the way I kept it stocked for the property taxes coming due in the fall. I clicked over to the linked savings, the one Rose and I built up slow over years, the one I never touched unless the roof needed it or a hospital did. That account was gutted too, $36,000 and some change gone. Between the two of them, I was looking at a hole just under $47,000, and it hadn't been dug by a thief in the night. It had been dug with a card that had my name printed right on it. I went line by line, the way I used to go line by line on a bid that didn't add up. Two big withdrawals stood out clean as fresh mortar against old brick. One to a barn out past Fort Mill, the kind of place that rents itself out for weddings now. String lights and a gravel lot where cows used to stand. The other to a catering outfit I'd never heard of. Memo line just said, deposit. Both dated the same week in March. Both drawn against an account that had Rose's name still listed on it as co-owner, even though she'd been 6 weeks in the ground by the time that first check cleared. I sat there a long minute with my coffee gone cold in front of me. I want to tell you I felt rage first, something hot and quick, but that's not honest. What I felt first was closer to the feeling you get standing under a beam you poured yourself, watching it flex in a way it was never built to flex, and understanding in your gut, before your head catches up, that something underneath it has already failed. I picked up the phone and called my son. Jeremy came over that same afternoon. He walked in the way he always walked into a hard conversation, shoulders up near his ears, eyes finding anything in the room that wasn't my face. I had the statement printed out and laid flat on the kitchen table, right where Rose and I used to do the books together, and I just turned it around to face him and put my finger on the 2 withdrawals. "You want to tell me what a barn out on Fort Mill Highway is doing charging your mother's savings account?" I said. He didn't answer right away. He pulled out the chair across from me, the one that used to be Rose's chair on Sunday mornings, and he sat down in it like the chair itself might object. "It's for the venue," he finally said. "For June." Crystal found the date. It was the only weekend they had open before fall, and the deposit had to go in fast, or we'd lose it. "With my money, with the account, Dad, the one you set me up on. I know how it looks." "Tell me how it looks to you then, since you seem to have a handle on it." He rubbed the back of his neck. Crystal said, "With Mom gone, and with you slowing down some, that you'd want to help us get started right. That you wouldn't want us waiting around asking permission for every little thing when we could just handle it and tell you after. She said you'd rather see the money used for something happy than sitting in an account doing nothing. She said that. She said Dad would want this," Jeremy told me. And I watched him hear himself say it out loud for the first time. Watched something behind his eyes flinch at how it sounded once it left his mouth in front of me instead of in front of her. I didn't raise my voice. "I want you to understand that, because it would have been easy and it wouldn't have gotten me $1 closer to knowing the truth of what I was sitting across from. 48 years running a crew taught me that a man who's yelling has already lost the room. So I kept my voice level, the way I'd keep it level, standing over a slab that had cracked on a job I was responsible for, because getting loud about a crack doesn't fill it back in. "Did I ever tell you I'd want this?" I asked him. "Any part of it? The barn, the caterer, spending your mother's name on a check 6 weeks after I buried her?" "No," he said. "Quiet." "Then don't hand me somebody else's guess about what I want, like it's my own words. I'm sitting right here. I can still tell you myself." He put his head down at that, hands folded on the table like a boy waiting on a report card, and told me he'd pay it back. Said there'd be wedding gifts coming, cash mostly. That's how Crystal's side did things, envelopes at the door. And once those came in, he'd square the account before I even noticed the gap. I told him I'd already noticed the gap. That was rather the whole conversation we were having. "I'm not asking you for a promise about money that hasn't shown up yet," I told him. "I'm asking you why you let somebody spend your mother out from under her own account, without picking up the phone and asking me first. You've got my number, Jeremy. You've had it your whole life." He didn't have an answer for that one. Some questions a man can't answer without saying something true about himself. He's not ready to say yet. And I've learned not to press a boy past the point where he'll just start telling you what you want to hear instead of what's real. I let it sit. I told him I loved him because I did and still do. And I told him this wasn't finished because it wasn't. Then I let him go home to whatever conversation was waiting for him there. That evening, I called Marvin Phillips. Marvin and I go back better than 30 years, since before he ever wore a tie to work. Back when he was just a loan officer trying to convince his branch that a concrete contractor with dust on his boots was still a good bet. He ran that branch of First Carolina Credit Union for the better part of 2 decades before he retired, and even sitting home now, he still knows exactly which door to knock on and who answers it. "Kenneth," he said, when he picked up, "it's late for you to be calling about nothing." I told him it wasn't nothing. I told him what I'd found, the barn, the caterer, the number sitting under the number that should have been there. Marvin didn't interrupt me once. He let me lay it all out flat the way you'd lay out a set of plans before a man who's going to have to build off them. "You want me to walk you through freezing it," he said, when I finished. "I want it done tonight if it can be done tonight." He walked me through it himself, on the phone, patient the way a good foreman is patient with a new hand who's never run a particular piece of equipment before. I froze what was left in both accounts before I went to bed that night, maybe $1,100 total between them by then. But principal isn't measured by the balance, it's measured by whether the door's still standing open for anybody to walk through again. And then, right there in that same call, I asked Marvin what it would take to pull Jeremy's convenience access off the bill pay account entirely. That's a 5-minute form, Marvin told me. You want me to send it tonight, or you want to sit with it first? Send it tonight, I said. I've sat with it plenty. I didn't do it to punish my son. I want that understood plain, because I've turned this over in my head 100 times since, and I still land in the same place. A man doesn't leave a spare key sitting in a lock once he's found out somebody's been letting themselves in without asking. That's not cruelty. That's just a man closing a door that should have never been left open that wide to begin with. Rose used to say, I ran my business the same way I ran my house. Careful, quiet, no wasted motion, and fixing a thing the same day you find it broken, instead of waiting around to see if it fixes itself. This was no different. I signed the form Marvin sent over, and by morning, the access that had let anybody but me move money out of that account was gone. I didn't call Crystal to tell her. I figured Jeremy would. He did, apparently, and fast, because 2 days later, my phone rang, and it was Crystal's voice on the other end of it, tight and quick in a way I hadn't heard from her before. All the honey was gone out of it. Kenneth, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding with the account, she said. Jeremy's card got declined at the florist this morning, in front of people. There's no misunderstanding, I told her. I closed the access. That account belongs to me, same as it always has. That access was for the family, she said, for the wedding. We had things scheduled around that money being available. It was for medical bills, I said, for Rose. I set it up so my son could help me get her to appointments and keep the lights paid when I was too worn down some weeks to think straight. It was never a wedding fund, Crystal. Nobody voted on that but you. There was a silence on the line then. The kind of silence a man learns to read over enough years in business. The sound of somebody recalculating rather than backing down. When she spoke again, her voice had gone flat and careful, like she was choosing each word off a shelf instead of just saying what she felt. You're really gonna make this hard, she said, after everything we've all been through. I didn't make anything hard, I told her. I just stopped somebody else from making it easy on themselves at my expense. She hung up without saying goodbye, and I stood there in my kitchen holding a phone that had gone quiet, and I understood. The way you understand a fight is starting before the first real blow lands. That closing that account hadn't ended a thing between us. It had only told her plainly for the first time that I was still standing in the room and still holding the ledger. And a woman like that doesn't walk away from a ledger. She just starts looking for a different way to get her hands back on it. Crystal didn't call again after that. That was the part that told me something was moving behind the scenes, because a woman like her doesn't go quiet unless she's building instead of arguing. Arguing is loud. Building takes patience, and April taught me she had plenty of it when there was something at the end of it worth having. It started small enough that I almost didn't clock it for what it was. Karen came by again, first week of April, casserole dish in hand like always, except this time she had her phone out before she'd even set the dish down on the counter. She was taking pictures. Not of me, of the kitchen, the sink, where I'd let a few days of dishes stack up because my hands had been sore from working in Rose's garden beds the day before. The counter, where I'd left a pill organizer open with Tuesday's slots still full because I'd forgotten it after breakfast. Not because I couldn't remember I had a pill to take, but because the phone rang and I'd gone to answer it and never came back to finish the thought. Just checking the light in here, Karen said, when she caught me watching her. This kitchen gets such good afternoon sun. I always tell my clients, natural light does wonders for staging photos. She smiled at me over the top of the phone, easy as anything, like she hadn't just taken 4 pictures of an old man's dirty sink. I didn't say a word about it. I've stood on job sites and watched a man measure a wall with a tape he already knew the answer to, just so he'd have a number written down somewhere official looking when it came time to argue about it later. I recognized the motion. I just didn't yet know what she was building toward, only that a woman doesn't photograph another man's sink for the light. A week after that, Jeremy mentioned, careful and sideways, that Crystal had started keeping notes. Just so we've got a record, he said, standing in my doorway instead of coming all the way in, like some part of him already knew he shouldn't be delivering this message. Like when you called her about the garden hose and forgot you'd already called her that morning. Little things like that. She just wants to keep track in case a doctor ever needs the whole picture. "What doctor?" I said. "Nobody yet," he said. "Too quick." "She's just being careful, Dad. That's all it is." I let it go, because pressing Jeremy on a thing before he's ready to say it, plain never gets you anywhere but a longer silence. But I want you to understand what was actually happening to me that April from where I was standing. Every ordinary thing an old man does in his own house, every forgotten pill slot, every stack of dishes, every hose left running an extra minute, was being written down somewhere I couldn't see. Collected the way you collect nails in a coffee can, waiting on the day you've got enough of them to build something. I started keeping my own records too, though I didn't tell a soul I was doing it. Every visit, every odd question, every time Crystal's voice on the phone didn't match the words coming out of it, I wrote the date on a legal pad I kept in the drawer under the phone book, same drawer Rose used to keep her recipe cards in. I've built enough foundations to know you pour a slab before you frame the walls. If somebody was pouring a case against me, I intended to have my own slab poured right alongside it. Then came the middle of May, and a woman named Lisa Valencia showed up at my door on a Thursday afternoon, clipboard in hand, introducing herself as a geriatric care manager doing what she called a wellness check. "Your family wanted some peace of mind," she told me, standing on my porch in a blazer that looked more like an interview than a house call. Nothing to worry about, just a conversation. I let her in. I've never once been afraid of a conversation in my own kitchen, and I wasn't about to start being afraid of one at 71. She sat across from me at the same table where Jeremy had sat, with his head down in March, and she opened that clipboard and she started asking me questions in a voice that was pleasant on top and testing underneath. The way a man taps a wall with a hammer handle to hear if there's rot behind the plaster, before he ever says the word rot out loud. "Can you tell me today's date, Mr. Rogers?" "May the 14th, I told her. Thursday. Rose and I used to garden on Thursdays, when she was well enough. And do you remember what you had for breakfast? 2 eggs and the end of a loaf of bread that needed using." "I remember exactly what I had for breakfast, ma'am. I remember what I had for breakfast most days of my adult life. That's not usually the sort of thing a man forgets unless somebody's paying him to." She wrote something down. I watched her do it, watched the pen move without much hesitation, like the answer had already been decided before she asked the question. Then she asked about my finances. Did I know the balance in my accounts? Did I ever feel confused managing my own bills? Had anyone recently expressed concern about my judgment? "Somebody drained $47,000 out of an account with my name on it back in March," I told her. Plain as I'd tell a supplier the truth about a late delivery. That's the concern that ought to be on your clipboard, not whether I remember my eggs. She didn't write that part down. I noticed that too. A pen that moves fast for the answers somebody wants and goes still for the ones they don't is not a pen taking an honest count. And I've watched enough men shade a set of numbers in my life to know the difference between an accident and a habit. She left an hour later, thanked me for my time, said she'd be in touch with the family. I stood at the window and watched her get into a car that had a magnetic sign on the door. The same company name I'd heard Karen mention over coffee back in February, Graceful Transitions Senior Solutions. And something in my chest went cold and clear all at once. The way it does when you finally see the whole shape of a crack you'd only been feeling in pieces. I didn't wait until Sunday that week. I picked up the phone that same evening and called Wayne Butler. Wayne and I have known each other going on 40 years, since he was a young lawyer just hanging his own shingle, and I was a young contractor who needed somebody honest to look over a supplier contract before I signed my name to it. He'd drafted the trust Rose and I set up back in 2010, the one that held the house and what savings we'd built together. And I hadn't thought much about that binder in years, the way you don't think much about a foundation once the house is standing solid on top of it. "Wayne," I said when he picked up, "I need to sit down with you. Not on the phone. I think somebody's building a case to have me declared unfit, and I want to know exactly what stands between them and my front door." He didn't waste time asking me if I was sure. Wayne's never been a man who needed convincing twice when an old friend's voice told him something was wrong. He had me in his office 2 days later, across a desk stacked with folders, and I laid it all out for him, same as I'd laid it out for Jeremy at my kitchen table in March. The drained accounts, the photographs of my sink, the woman with the clipboard asking about my eggs and writing down nothing about the $47,000. Wayne listened the whole way through without interrupting, the way a good man listens when he already suspects the story's going to matter more than the person telling it realizes. When I finished, he got up, went to a cabinet along the wall, and pulled out a binder with a cracked spine. The corner's gone soft with 16 years of sitting untouched on a shelf. "You and Rose signed this in 2010, he said, setting it down between us and opening it to a page he found, without much searching, like some part of him had been expecting to open it back up eventually. Standard language back then. "I want to read you something I don't think either one of you ever had reason to think twice about." He read it slow, the way you'd read a level off a beam, before you trusted your weight to it. I won't pretend I understood every word of the legal phrasing the first time through, but I understood the shape of it plain enough, and the shape of it was this. If anybody named to inherit anything under that trust ever went after me claiming I wasn't fit to run my own life, and that claim didn't hold water, they lost their place in it. Not reduced. Gone. And if it ever came out that somebody had been taking advantage of me financially while they were at it, that sealed the door shut for good. "You wrote this in 2010, I said. "Jeremy wasn't even with Crystal yet, wasn't anywhere close. We wrote it because I've seen this exact thing happen to a dozen other families over 30 years of doing this work," Wayne said. "It's not built for Jeremy. It's not built for anybody in particular. It's built for exactly the kind of trouble you're describing to me right now, whoever ends up standing on the wrong side of it." He closed the binder, but he didn't put it away. He left it sitting there between us on the desk like a tool he wasn't done using yet. "Kenneth, I want to be straight with you. If this thing you're describing turns into something formal, a petition, a filing, we're going to need more than my memory of a conversation we had in this office today. We're going to need a doctor's word, dated before anybody files a single page against you, so nobody can stand up later and say we built it after the fact to save you." "Alexandra," I said. Dr. Chen had been seeing to me and Rose both for going on 15 years. She'd sat with me the week Rose passed, checked my blood pressure without me even asking her to, the way a good doctor does when she can see grief sitting on a man's chest like a slab he hasn't figured out how to carry yet. "I'll call her office myself," Wayne said. "Get you in this week if I can. Not because I think for 1 second there's anything wrong with your mind, Kenneth. I've sat across this desk from you for 40 years, and I've never once seen you miss a number that mattered. But I want it on paper, in her hand, dated before whatever's coming ever shows up on a docket. A house doesn't fall because the beam was weak. It falls because nobody checked it before the weight came down." I sat there a minute looking at that old binder, 16 years of dust worked into its corners, and thought about Rose sitting beside me in this same office the day we signed it. Neither one of us imagining we were building a wall to keep our own son's fiancée out of a house our son might never get to stand in the way she'd already decided he would. I thought about the $47,000. I thought about a clipboard with my breakfast written down on it and nothing about the money. "Make the call," I told Wayne. "Whatever's coming, I'd rather be standing on solid ground when it gets here than find out I wasn't, in front of a judge." 2 days later, true to his word, Wayne had me sitting in a paper gown in Dr. Chen's office on a Tuesday morning, socks still on because nobody ever tells you to take those off too. Alexandra Chen had been doctoring me and Rose both since before either one of us had a single gray hair worth mentioning, and she came into that exam room already knowing why I was there because Wayne had called ahead and told her plain. "Kenneth," she said, sitting down across from me instead of standing over me the way some of the younger ones do. "Like a man in a paper gown is somehow easier to talk down to. Wayne tells me somebody's questioning your competency." "Somebody's fixing to," I said. "Nothing filed yet far as I know. But I'd rather you look me over now, while there's nothing writing on it, than have you look me over later, after there is." She smiled a little at that. The kind of smile a person gives you when they understand exactly what you're doing and respect the sense in it. "That's the smartest thing anybody's said to me all week," she said. "Let's get started." She ran me through more than Lisa Valencia ever had, and I want to tell you the difference, because it mattered to me, even sitting there in that thin paper gown. Dr. Chen asked me the date, same as Lisa had, and I gave it to her the same way, no hesitation. But then she kept going. She had me draw a clock face and put the hands at 10 past 11. She had me count backward from 100 by sevens, which is a meaner trick than it sounds, and I stumbled once around the 60s and caught myself and kept on. She asked me to name my grandchildren, though I've got none yet, and I told her so, and told her Jeremy and Crystal were engaged to be married, which she already knew, and she wrote that down too, along with the date I told her. She asked about the accounts. I told her about the $47,000, plain and complete. Same story I'd given Wayne, same story I'd tried to give Lisa Valencia before her pen went still on me. Dr. Chen's pen didn't go still. It kept moving the whole time I talked, filling up a page, then a second one. When she was done, she sat back and looked at me over the top of her glasses, the same look she used to give me when she was scolding me about my blood pressure numbers back before Rose passed, half doctor and half old friend. "There's nothing wrong with your mind, Kenneth," she said. "I want to say that to you plain, not just write it down somewhere. You're sharp. Sharper than half the men I see in here who are 20 years younger than you. Whatever's happening with your family, it isn't happening because you've slipped. It's happening because somebody's decided it would be convenient if you had. Can you put that on paper?" I said. "Dated. Today." "I already am," she said. And she finished it right there at her desk before I left the building. 2 full pages in her own hand, dated, signed, a copy for me, and a copy sent straight over to Wayne's office by courier that same afternoon. So there'd be no question later about when it was written or who'd seen it first. I sat in my truck in the parking lot afterward for a minute before I started the engine, and I thought about how strange a thing it was. A man my age paying to prove he still had his wits about him. The same wits that built a business out of nothing but a mixer and a strong back and 40 years of never missing a payment. But I've poured enough foundations to know you don't wait until the walls are up to find out the ground underneath them is soft. You test it first. I'd tested mine. It held. 3 weeks went by after that quiet enough that I almost let myself believe the worst of it had passed. I kept up my Sundays with the bank statements, kept my legal pad in the drawer under the phone book, kept working in Rose's garden beds because the tomatoes don't care what's happening in a family, they just want water and sun, same as always. Jeremy came by twice in those 3 weeks, both times alone, both times not staying long, both times with something unsaid sitting behind his eyes that he never quite got around to letting out. I didn't push him. A green board will crack if you force it before it's ready to bend. Then, on a Thursday afternoon in the last week of May, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway, and a man in a collared shirt got out carrying a manila envelope, and something in my chest already knew, before he ever opened his mouth, what was inside it. "Kenneth Rogers," he said. "That's me. I've got some paperwork for you, sir." He held it out. Didn't say much else. Men who do that kind of work for a living learn early not to say much else. I took the envelope, and I want to tell you my hand didn't shake taking it, because it didn't. I signed where he pointed, and he thanked me, and he got back in his car and drove off. And I stood there in my own driveway holding a stack of papers that told me my son had filed to have me declared unable to run my own life. I read it standing right there in the yard, didn't even wait to get inside. Petition for guardianship. Jeremy Rogers, petitioner. My name after his, respondent, which is a word I'd never had cause to be called before. 71 years old on the day I was born, and 71 now, and never once in my life had a court paper call me that. Attached to it, an affidavit from Lisa Valencia, the same woman who'd asked me about my eggs and never once written down a word about the $47,000. Reading her account of that visit was like reading a report on a building I'd never stood inside. Confusion regarding financial matters, it said. Difficulty with basic self-care tasks, it said. And I thought of that pill organizer with one open slot Karen Klein had photographed for the light, and I understood exactly where that line had come from. I carried the papers inside and set them on the kitchen table. Same table Jeremy had sat at with his head down back in March. Same table Lisa Valencia had sat at with her clipboard in May. And I looked at that table a long minute and thought about how much of this whole business had happened, right there in that one room, over that one piece of oak rose, and I had bought secondhand back in 1983 because it was solid and we couldn't afford new. Then I called Wayne. It came, I told him, before he'd even said hello proper. "Read it to me," he said, and I did, every line, while he made small sounds on the other end that told me he was writing as fast as I could talk. When I finished, he was quiet a second, and then he said, "All right, this is exactly what we prepared for, Kenneth. Nothing in that filing surprises me, and nothing in it should surprise you either. Now, I'm going to enter my appearance for you tomorrow morning, and I'm filing Alexandra's letter right alongside it. Same day, same clerk, so there's no daylight between the accusation and the answer. They're going to have a hearing," I said. It wasn't a question. I'd read enough of the document to know that much. "They're going to have a hearing," Wayne agreed. "But Kenneth, I want you to hear this part clear, because I don't want you carrying it around wrong for the next few weeks. You are not walking into that courtroom as a weak man hoping somebody believes him. You are walking in as a man with a dated letter from his doctor of 15 years saying his mind is sound, and a trust document 16 years old that already decided what happens to anybody who files a petition like this one without cause. They built their whole case standing on a beam I've had my eye on since the day I read it back to you in this office. They just don't know it's there yet. I sat down at that oak table after we hung up, alone in a house that had been too quiet since January, and I looked at my son's name printed at the top of a legal filing asking a judge to take my life out of my own two hands. And I felt something I hadn't expected to feel reading it. Not fear. I've felt fear before, standing under a wall that wasn't cured enough to trust yet. And this wasn't that. This was closer to the feeling you get standing at the edge of a pour you've checked 3 times already. Form boards braced, rebar tied, mix tested. Waiting on nothing now but the truck to back up and the chute to open. Everything that needed doing had already been done. All that was left now was to let it set. I picked up the phone one more time that evening, not to call Wayne again, but to write the date down on my legal pad in the drawer under the phone book, same as always. May the 28th, served. And under it, because I figured a man ought to mark the good along with the bad, I wrote one more line. Letter filed, binder ready. Then I closed the drawer and I went out to check on Rose's tomatoes before the light went. Because whatever was coming at me out of that courthouse, the garden still needed tending, same as it always had. I picked 3 tomatoes off the vine that were ready and left the green ones alone, same as I would any other evening, and I carried them inside in the bottom of my shirt because I never do remember to bring a bowl out with me. Rose used to laugh at that. Said a man who can pour a slab level to a 1/16 of an inch ought to be able to remember a bowl. 2 weeks went by after the papers landed in my driveway, and in that time, Wayne filed everything he said he'd file. Doctor. Chen's letter went in the same week as his notice of appearance, dated and signed, and sitting in the court file right alongside Jeremy's petition, so that from the very first page anybody read on that docket, there'd be no way to pretend my mind came into question only after somebody decided to question it. Wayne called me twice just to walk me through what he called the shape of things. Not to worry me, to square me up, the way you square a form before you ever think about pouring into it. Then, on a Monday, the phone rang, and it was Crystal. I want to tell you, in 71 years, I have talked to that woman maybe a dozen times all told, and every one of those times before had her voice pitched somewhere between polite and impatient, like she was doing me a favor just by being on the line. This time, it was different. This time, her voice came out soft, careful, dressed up nice the way she dresses up everything else. Kenneth, she said, I know things have been hard between us. I want you to know Jeremy and I have been talking, and we think it's time we all sat down together, as a family, before the wedding gets any closer. When were you thinking? I said. Thursday, June 11th. At the house. Yours, I mean. We thought it should be there, since that's where everybody's roots are. She let that sit a second, like the word roots was supposed to land soft on me, remind me whose name might end up on the deed someday. I've invited a couple of Jeremy's aunts, and Mom's coming too. We just want to clear the air, get everybody looking forward instead of back. I told her that sounded fine. I told her I'd be there, since it was my own house, and I hadn't exactly planned on being anywhere else that Thursday evening. She thanked me, sweet as you please, and hung up. And I stood there in my kitchen, holding the phone a minute, looking at that same oak table, and I thought, a woman doesn't organize a room full of relatives in her future father-in-law's house 9 days before her wedding, just to clear the air. A woman does that because she's fixing to stand at the head of that table and announce something in front of enough witnesses that nobody argues with her about it afterward. So I called Wayne. They're having a family meeting, I told him, Thursday, my house, June the 11th. He was quiet a second on the other end, and I could hear him thinking, the way you can sometimes hear a man's mind working through a phone line, same as you'd hear a truck idling rough. 9 days before the wedding, he said. That's what I make of it too. That's not a family meeting, Kenneth. That's a coronation. They're going to sit you down in front of people who love you and make it feel like the kindest thing in the world for you to just go ahead and hand it over, guardianship or no guardianship. So the wedding doesn't have a cloud sitting over it. I'd bet you good money there's a paper somewhere in that house already, something with your name on a line, ready to be signed the minute the room feels warm enough. So, what do I do? You go, Wayne said, and you let me come with you. I want to tell you, that surprised me some, because Wayne's never been a man who puts himself in the middle of a family's business uninvited. Not in 40 years of knowing him. You're going to sit in my living room. Quiet as a post, he said. You don't announce me. You don't make a show of it. I come in with you. I find a chair in the corner, and I don't say one word unless the moment calls for it. But, Kenneth, I want that letter of Alexandra's in my hand when I walk in that door, and I want the original trust binder sitting on my lap. Because if Crystal Klein is going to stand up in your living room and tell a room full of people that your competency is already decided and your money's already as good as signed over, then somebody in that room besides you needs to know exactly what still stands in the way of that and needs to be ready to say so. I told him that suited me fine, told him he'd always been welcome at my table, meeting or no meeting, and this Thursday wasn't going to be any different. The days between that phone call and Thursday went slower than any 4 days I can remember since the week before Rose's funeral. I kept up appearances, watered the garden, answered when Jeremy called once, just to ask was I doing all right, and I told him I was, and he went quiet on the other end, in that way he does when there's something sitting behind his teeth he can't quite get loose. I didn't push him. I'd learned that much these past months. A board that's ready to give will give on its own time, and a man forcing it before it's ready just splits the grain wrong. Thursday came in warm and a little overcast. The kind of June evening down here where the air sits heavy on you before a storm decides whether it's coming or not. Wayne pulled into my driveway at 5:30, 40 minutes before anybody else was due, carrying a leather folder under one arm and that same cracked spine binder under the other, and I met him at the door. You ready? He said. Been ready a long time, I told him, and I meant it truer than maybe even he understood. He came in quiet, same as he'd promised, and took a straight-back chair from against the wall and set it off in the corner of the living room, near enough to hear everything, far enough that a body walking in fresh wouldn't think much of an old man sitting there with a folder in his lap. Could have been anybody's uncle. Could have been nobody at all. The way Crystal's eyes passed right over him when she came through the door 20 minutes later, carrying a tray of something wrapped in foil, like she was still playing the same casserole hand her mother had played back in February. The house filled up slow after that. 2 of Jeremy's aunts on Rose's side came in together, both of them hugging my neck and telling me how good it was to see everybody together, how Rose would have loved seeing the family gathered under one roof again. Karen Klein came in behind them, with a smile stretched a little too wide across her face, the same smile she'd worn pacing off my square footage back in February. And she took my hand in both of hers and told me how glad she was. We were all finally sitting down like adults. Jeremy came in last, hands in his pockets, eyes down, looking like a man walking into a room he already suspected he shouldn't be walking into. We got everybody settled, folding chairs pulled in from the garage to go with what furniture we already had, until the living room held more bodies than it had held at one time since Rose's own service back in January. I sat in my chair, the one that's always been mine, and Crystal stood up near the fireplace where everybody's eyes would naturally land on her, and she waited for the room to go quiet, the way a woman does when she's rehearsed a thing enough times to know exactly how long to let the silence stretch before she starts. I want to thank everybody for coming, she said. I know this has been a hard year. Losing Rose the way we did, right at the start of it, and then everything that's happened since with the accounts, and now this whole business in the courts. I think we're all tired of it. I know I am. I know Jeremy is. She looked over at him, and he didn't look up. And with the wedding just 9 days out now, I don't want any of us walking down that aisle carrying all this weight. I don't think Rose would have wanted that either. I sat still and let her talk. A man learns, running concrete jobs for 40 years, that the surest way to see a crooked pour is to let the man responsible for it keep talking until he shows you exactly where the low spot is. I think we all know how this guardianship is likely to go, she went on, and here her voice picked up that same practiced softness she'd used on the phone, like she was doing me the kindness of saying out loud what everybody was supposedly already thinking. Kenneth, nobody in this room thinks less of you. We just think it's time to make things easier, on you and on everybody who loves you. So instead of waiting on a judge, instead of dragging this out through a courtroom that's just going to cost everybody money and heartache either way, I think the kind thing, the family thing, is for you to just go ahead and sign your financial affairs over to Jeremy now, before the wedding. So we can all walk into that day with a clean slate instead of a fight hanging over us. She reached down beside the fireplace and lifted a folder off the side table, already prepared, already tabbed, and held it out toward me across the room, like a woman offering a gift she'd wrapped herself. "It's already drawn up," she said. "All it needs is your signature." The room had gone dead quiet. Jeremy's aunts were looking at me. Karen Klein was looking at Crystal with something close to pride on her face. Jeremy himself still hadn't lifted his eyes off the floor. And over in the corner, in the straight-back chair nobody had thought twice about, Wayne Butler set the leather folder down flat across his knees and opened it. Wayne didn't stand up right away. He let Crystal's arm stay out there a second longer, the folder still hanging in the air between us, and I could see her start to notice that nobody in the room was looking at me anymore. They were looking at the corner. "Crystal," Wayne said, and his voice came out easy, the way a man talks when he already knows how a job is going to finish and isn't in any hurry to get there. "Before anybody signs anything in this room tonight, I think there's a couple of things everybody ought to hear first. I apologize for interrupting. I'll be quick." She lowered the folder an inch, just enough to look at him proper, and I watched something cross her face, quick as a shadow off a passing cloud, trying to place him. Karen Klein placed him faster. I saw her spine go straight in her chair. "This is a family meeting," Crystal said. "I don't think we need a lawyer sitting in on it." "I'm not here as a lawyer tonight," Wayne said, standing now, folder open across one forearm, the trust binder tucked under the other. "I'm here as a man who's known Kenneth Rogers going on 40 years, and who happens to hold a couple of pieces of paper that are already part of the record whether I read them out loud in this living room or not. I'd rather everybody hear them from a friend than read them cold in a courthouse next month. Seems kinder that way." Nobody told him to sit back down. He took that as his answer. "First thing," he said, and he lifted a single page out of the folder, held it up so the room could see there was a letterhead on it, a date, a signature. "This is a letter from Dr. Alexandra Chen. Some of you know her. She's been Kenneth's physician 15 years. She examined him in May at my request, and I want to read you the date on this letter before I read you a word of what's in it, because the date is the whole of what matters here." He turned it toward the light. "May the 9th. He let that sit a second. "Now I understand there was a wellness visit conducted at this house not long after that, by a woman under contract to a company called Graceful Transitions Senior Solutions." He didn't look at Karen Klein when he said it, but I did, and I watched her hands fold themselves tight in her lap. "And I understand a petition was filed at the end of this month in York County, built in good part on notes from that visit. What I want this room to understand, plain, is that Dr. Chen's letter was written and signed and sitting in my office before that wellness visit ever happened, before anybody ever knocked on Kenneth's door with a clipboard. This isn't a doctor answering an accusation. This is a doctor's finding that was already on the books before the accusation existed." He read from it, slow, so nobody could claim later they'd misheard. "Mr. Rogers presents as alert, oriented, and fully competent to manage his personal and financial affairs. I find no evidence of cognitive impairment consistent with the concerns raised." One of Jeremy's aunts made a small sound, not quite a word, and put her hand to her mouth. "So, whatever this room was told about Kenneth's condition," Wayne said, "and whatever a judge is going to be asked to believe come next month, I want it clear tonight that the medical record runs the other direction, and it ran that direction first." Crystal's face had gone tight and bright, the way concrete goes when you finish it too fast, and the surface starts fighting you instead of setting smooth. "That doesn't change anything," she said. "The petition's already filed. A hearing's already scheduled. One letter doesn't undo that." "You're right," Wayne said. "Easy as ever. It doesn't undo the filing, but I didn't stand up to talk about the petition. I stood up to talk about this." He set the letter down and lifted the binder instead, the one with the cracked spine, the one that had been sitting in his office file cabinet since before Jeremy ever laid eyes on Crystal Klein, since before Rose and I had a single gray hair between us. He opened it to a page already marked with a strip of yellow paper, and he held it out in front of him like a man reading scripture, not because he needed the words. I'd bet he could have recited that clause from memory, but because he wanted every soul in that room watching his hands turn real pages, so nobody could ever say afterward that this was something he'd made up on the spot to win an argument. "This is the Rogers Family Living Trust," he said. "Kenneth and Rose signed it in 2010. My firm drafted it. I want you to understand something about a document like this. It's not built for the good years. Nobody needs a trust when everybody's getting along fine. It's built for exactly the kind of year this family's just had. And 16 years ago, when I sat across a table from Kenneth and Rose and walked them through every page of this thing line by line, we included a clause that's standard in trusts like this one I've read out to maybe 24 families over the years, and never once, not one time, had to actually use. He looked up from the page, and for the first time that evening, his voice lost its patience and picked up something harder underneath it. Something that had been sitting quiet in him the whole meeting, waiting on its moment, same as I'd been waiting on mine. I'm going to use it tonight. He read it slow, the way you'd read a beam calculation to a man who needed to trust every number in it. Said that any beneficiary named to receive property under the trust would forfeit that interest, forfeit it entirely and permanently, if that beneficiary brought or supported a proceeding to have the grantor declared incompetent without a good faith medical basis for doing so, or if that beneficiary was later found to have financially exploited the grantor while he was living. He closed the binder soft, the way you'd close a door on a room you didn't want to wake anybody in. Jeremy, he said, and this was the first time all night he'd said my son's name, gentle as he could make it, filed a guardianship petition against his father on the 28th of May. He filed it after a wellness visit that was arranged and paid for by Graceful Transition Senior Solutions, and after his father's medical record already showed full competency, dated 3 weeks earlier. And back in March, $47,000 moved out of Kenneth's accounts into wedding vendor deposits, money Kenneth never agreed to give and didn't find out was gone until he went looking for it himself. He looked around the room, slow, giving everybody a turn. Under the language of this trust, that petition, filed the way it was filed, on the record it was built on, voids Jeremy's interest in this house, not reduces it, not delays it, voids it outright as of tonight. And the $47,000 doesn't get to sit quiet as a wedding gift anymore. It's a debt now, owed straight back to the trust, same as if it had been borrowed from a bank. The room had gone so quiet I could hear the refrigerator running out in the kitchen, that same kitchen where Crystal had once fanned out her Cedar Grove pamphlets like they belonged on my counter, and I thought, not for the first time that year, about how much noise a house can carry and still not make a sound. That's not legal, Crystal said, but her voice had lost its practiced softness now, gone thin and fast instead. You can't just decide that sitting in a chair. A judge decides that. A judge will confirm it, Wayne said. That's true. But I've read this clause to plenty of attorneys over plenty of years, and I've never once seen one try to argue around language this plain when the facts line up behind it the way they line up here. You're welcome to bring in your own counsel and test it. I'd encourage it, honestly. I think you'll hear the same thing I'm telling you tonight, just from a stranger instead of a friend. Karen Klein hadn't said one word this whole time, and when she finally did, her voice came out smaller than I'd ever heard it. Smaller than it had been pacing off my square footage back in February with a tape measure in her hand, like she already owned the place. What does financially exploited mean? She said. Exactly. It means what the state of South Carolina says it means, Wayne told her, and he turned toward her for the first time all evening, and something in his face had gone flat and businesslike. A man closing out a set of drawings, not a man enjoying himself. It means an old man's money moved without his knowledge or consent, and a paid affidavit built off a staged visit used to support a legal proceeding against him. When those two things sit together the way they sit together here, the law doesn't leave a lawyer much choice in the matter. I'm required to report it to the state agency that handles exactly this kind of thing. I'll be filing that report myself this week, and I expect it's going to have some interest in Graceful Transition Senior Solutions and in the woman who signed that affidavit, and in whatever certification lets her go into old men's houses with a clipboard in the first place. Karen's mouth opened and nothing came out of it. I watched the color drain out of her face, same as I'd watched wet concrete lose its sheen once the sun hit it too hard. And I thought about her running that struggling little business of hers on nothing but referrals and goodwill, and how a state investigation lands on an outfit like that, about the same way a wrecking ball lands on a wall that was never poured with enough rebar in it to begin with. Jeremy hadn't moved this whole time. He'd been sitting on the edge of the couch with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the floor since before Wayne ever stood up, and I watched him now. Watched his shoulders start to shake just slightly, not crying exactly, more like a man feeling the weight of something land on him all at once after holding his breath against it for months. Jeremy, Crystal said, sharp, reaching for him without looking at him, still watching Wayne like she thought there might be one more card left to play if she just found the right angle to ask for it. Say something. My son lifted his head, and when his eyes found mine across that room full of relatives in folding chairs, I saw something in them I hadn't seen since he was a boy, standing in the driveway watching me lay block, waiting to be told whether the wall was going to hold. Jeremy, I said, quiet, the first thing I'd said out loud since the meeting started. You don't owe her an answer right this second. You owe yourself one first. He looked at me a long moment, and then he stood up off that couch like a man getting up out of water he'd been sitting in too long, slow and unsteady on his feet, and he turned toward Crystal instead of toward me. Is it true, he said to her, the wellness visit? Did you know that letter existed before you sent that woman over here? Crystal's chin came up. I knew Dad needed looking after. That's all I knew. That's not what I asked you. Jeremy, don't do this in front of everybody. You're the one who wanted everybody here, he said. And his voice cracked a little on the word everybody, not from weakness, more like a board finally giving up the fight against a nail it had been holding back for months. You're the one who stood up by that fireplace and told this whole family it was time for me to take over Dad's money. You never once told me there was a clause in that trust. You never once told me Dr. Chen had already looked at him and said he was fine before Lisa Valencia ever knocked on this door with her clipboard. Because it doesn't matter, Crystal said, and her voice had climbed up out of that soft, rehearsed register into something thinner, something that scraped. A judge sees a case, Jeremy, not a folder some old lawyer pulls out of his lap in somebody's living room. This isn't over just because he read a paragraph out loud. It's over for me, Jeremy said. The room had gone so still, I could hear one of the aunt's chairs creak when she shifted her weight. Karen Klein had both hands pressed flat against her knees now, like she was trying to hold the whole evening down by main force, keep it from lifting off the floor and blowing apart in front of her. Jeremy, Karen said. And there was something almost pleading under the words now, all the polish gone off her the way varnish comes off a porch rail after one hard winter. Think about the wedding. Think about what's already paid for, the venue, the caterer. You cancel this now on top of everything else, and there's no getting that money back either way. There's no money to cancel with, Jeremy said, and he looked at her like he was seeing her clear for the first time in a year, the way a man looks at a wall once the plaster's cracked off it and he can finally see what's holding it up underneath, or what isn't. Wayne just said it himself. $47,000 isn't a wedding gift anymore. It's a debt, my debt, to my own father's trust, others. He almost laughed, except there wasn't a bit of humor in it, just air coming out of him he didn't know how else to let go of. I don't have a wedding to cancel, Karen. I've got a bill. Crystal's mouth opened like she meant to argue that too. Find some new angle, same as she'd found one every other time. This year somebody had put a wall up in front of her, but nothing came out. For the first time since I'd met the woman, back at Thanksgiving the year before Rose passed, I watched Crystal Klein run flat out of things to say. Wayne closed his folder easy, unhurried. The way a man packs up his tools at the end of a job, he already knows is finished, right? I'll be in touch with everyone's counsel this week, he said, mostly to the room in general, though his eyes went to Karen Klein a beat longer than anybody else. Kenneth doesn't need anything signed tonight. He didn't need anything signed when he walked into this room either. He looked over at me, and something passed between us that didn't need words. 40 years of watching each other pour concrete and draft papers and bury the people we loved. And he gave me the smallest nod, like a man checking a form before the truck comes to fill it. I stood up out of my chair, wasn't planning to say much. A man doesn't need to say much once the weight's already come down where it was always going to land. Same as you don't need to explain to a wall why it's still standing after the scaffolding comes off. But I looked around that room, at Jeremy's aunts with their hands still over their mouths, at Karen Klein staring hard at a spot on my carpet like she could will herself through the floor and out from under all of it, at Crystal standing by the fireplace with that folder still clutched to her chest, the one that had needed nothing but my signature 10 minutes before, and now wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. I want to say one thing, I said, and then I think everybody ought to go on home. My voice came out steadier than I expected it to, steadier than I'd have guessed sitting in that chair 5 minutes earlier. Rose and I built this family the same way I built every wall I ever poured. Slow, one course at a time. Checked level before we set the next block. because you don't get to go back and fix a crooked foundation once you've built 4 courses on top of it. I looked at Jeremy, not at Crystal, not at Karen. I never once thought my own son would be the one testing whether that foundation would hold. I want you to know that, not to shame you with it, just so you understand what this year's cost me, same as it's cost you. Jeremy's eyes were wet now, no shame left in him to hide it with. And he didn't say anything, just nodded, small, like a man taking a measurement he already knew the answer to before it was called out. Everybody's welcome to stay and have some coffee, I said, or everybody's welcome to go home. Either one's fine by me. But I believe Wayne and I have said what needed saying tonight. Nobody reached for coffee. Chairs started scraping back almost at once, the ants gathering purses and murmuring things to each other, too low for me to catch, though I didn't need to catch them to know the shape of what they were saying. Karen Klein was the first one out the door, moving fast for a woman her age, phone already out of her purse and up to her ear before she'd cleared the porch steps, and I wondered, watching her go, who she figured on calling first, her own lawyer, or whoever ran the books over at Graceful Transition Senior Solutions, trying to get ahead of a wave that was already well past the point of getting ahead of. Crystal didn't leave right away. She stood by that fireplace a long moment after everybody else had started clearing out, folders still against her chest, looking at Jeremy like she expected him to walk over and stand next to her the way he'd stood next to her every single day for the last 3 years. He didn't move. And when she finally understood he wasn't going to, something went out of her face, some certainty she'd been carrying since the day she first walked into my kitchen, with those Cedar Grove pamphlets fanned out like they'd always belonged there. And she turned and walked out my front door without another word to anybody in the room. Jeremy stood in the middle of my living room, a long time after the last car pulled out of the driveway, hands hanging loose at his sides, looking like a man standing in a field after a storm's finally blown through, taking stock of what's left standing and what isn't. "Dad," he said, and stopped. "Sit down a minute," I told him. "Coffee's still hot if you want it." He sat. Wayne gathered up his folder and his binder, quiet, giving us the room the way an old friend knows how to do without ever having to be asked, and told me he'd call in the morning and let himself out the front door into a night that had gone dark and still over Millhouse Road. The same road Rose and I had driven down 30 years before with a moving truck and a house full of boxes and not one soul in the world telling us how to live in it. I poured 2 cups from the pot Rose used to keep going from 6 in the morning till near midnight some days, back when the house had more people moving through it than just the 2 of us, and I set one down in front of Jeremy and kept the other for myself, and sat across from him at the same table where I had read that account balance 6 weeks after burying his mother. He wrapped both hands around the mug like it was January outside instead of June, like the warmth of it was the only thing keeping him upright. "I don't know where to start," he said. "Most men don't," I told him. "Start anywhere. It'll find its own order." He turned the mug a quarter turn on the table, and then another, watching the coffee settle instead of looking at me. "I knew the account was low. I knew it before you ever called Marvin. I told myself it was a loan, Dad. I told myself I'd square it before you even noticed a dime was gone." He shook his head slow. "I never once let myself think about what it'd look like from your side of it. A man burying his wife, and then his own son's name shows up on a withdrawal he didn't make. I noticed," I said. "Same Sunday I always check it. Same as I've checked it every Sunday for 30 years, rain or shine. Because that's what your mother and I built our whole life doing, checking the level before we set the next course. I let that sit a second. I want you to understand something, and I want you to hear it plain, not as a punishment, just as a fact. It wasn't the money that put a stone in my chest that morning. $47,000 is a number. I've poured driveways worth more than that, and never lost a night's sleep over the invoice. What put the stone in me was that you let somebody talk you into believing your own father wouldn't have minded." Jeremy's jaw worked, and for a second, I thought he might not get the next words out at all. "She kept saying you'd want this for us, that you and Mom always talked about wanting to see me settled, and I wanted to believe her so bad I stopped asking myself if it was true. Your mother did want to see you settled," I said. "She told me so herself, the week before she passed, sitting up in that bed with the oxygen line running to her nose, still worrying over you, same as she worried over you the day we brought you home from the hospital in 1985. But settled and robbed are 2 different words. Son. Your mother wanted you loved. She never once said she wanted you handed a house that wasn't yours to hand out, paid for with money that wasn't yours to spend. He flinched at that just slightly, like a man catching a splinter under a fingernail. I keep thinking about the day I proposed to her. December, right before Mom got the bad news from the doctor. Mom held my hand in the kitchen and told me she was happy for me. She meant it too. I could see it in her face. His voice caught. And I keep wondering what she'd say if she saw where it ended up. Guardianship papers. A stranger with a clipboard asking you what year it is. Your mother built 30 years of home into every room of this house, I said. She'd have seen straight through Crystal Klein in about 10 minutes flat, same as I did, and she'd have told you so to your face, gentle as she could manage it, because gentle was her way even when the truth in her mouth was hard as brick. I didn't have her gentleness in me this year, Jeremy. I had to do this my own way, quiet, slow, letting the wall stand up on its own weight instead of trying to talk anybody into believing it was standing. I took a drink of my coffee, black, same as I'd taken it every morning of my adult life. But I promise you, if she'd lived to see tonight, she wouldn't have been surprised by one single part of it, just heartbroken it ever got this far. Jeremy put his face in his hands for a moment, elbows on the table, and I let him have that. Didn't reach for him, didn't fill the silence up with anything. A man needs room to feel a thing all the way through before he can talk sense about it. When he came back up, his eyes were red but dry. What happens now? He said. To the house. To me. The house was never going to be yours while I'm breathing in it, I said. That was never a secret, Jeremy, whatever Crystal decided to believe about it. Your mother and I put this place in that trust back in 2010, so nobody, not a bank, not a lawsuit, not a scheming in-law, could ever pull it out from under us while we were still living in it. That was always the plan. What's different tonight isn't that the house stopped being yours somewhere down the road. What's different is that it's not coming to you at all anymore, not after what got filed in that courthouse in your name. He nodded, slow, like a man taking a blow he'd already braced himself for. I earned that, he said. I know I earned that. You let somebody else earn it for you, I said. That's a different thing than doing wrong on your own account. And I want you to hear the difference, because it matters for what comes next. A man who does wrong on his own account, there's not much left to talk about. A man who gets led into wrong because he never learned how to say no to somebody who loved him wrong, that man still got something worth working with. I set my cup down. Question is whether you're willing to do the work of learning it now, 41 years old, instead of 41 years too late. I don't even know how, he said, and it came out of him like something he'd been carrying a long time and never once said out loud to another living soul. I've never in my life told anybody no and had it stick. Not you, not Mom, God knows not her. I don't know what that even feels like. It feels like tonight, I said. Standing up off that couch and asking her a straight question in front of a room full of people who were all watching to see whether you would. That's what it feels like the first time. Don't expect it to feel good. It won't. Not for a good while. It'll feel like tearing something loose that's been stuck a long time. But it gets easier the second time, and easier still the third. Same as any muscle does once you start working it instead of letting it go soft. He was quiet a minute, turning that mug again. The wedding's in 9 days, he said. Like the fact of it had just now landed on him fresh, like he'd forgotten it entirely somewhere in the last hour, and it had come back to sit on his chest all at once. There's no way any of that happens now. Venue, caterer, all of it. It's gone. It was gone the day the money left this account without my say-so, I told him. You just hadn't caught up to it yet. I've got to call people, he said, mostly to himself, staring at some middle distance past my shoulder. And I could see him starting to count them off in his head, the deposits, the guest list, the relatives who'd already booked flights. I don't even know where to start with that either. You'll start the same way you started tonight, I said, one phone call at a time. And Jeremy, that debt's not going anywhere either, $47,000. Wayne's going to draw up terms, fair ones, something a working man can actually carry without it crushing him flat. But it's getting paid back into that trust, same as if you'd borrowed it from First Carolina itself. I'm not forgiving it tonight, and I want to be plain with you about that, so there's no confusion sitting between us later. Forgiving the man and forgiving the debt are two separate jobs, and I'm only about halfway done with the first one. I wouldn't want you to forgive it, he said. I wouldn't trust myself if you did. That was the first thing he'd said all night that sounded like his mother in him, and I felt something in my chest ease up a notch that had been tight since the day I found that account gutted. Door's open, I told him. Same door it's always been. But it opens on my terms from here forward, not anybody else's. Not Crystal's, not Karen Klein's, not any clipboard some stranger walks in here with. You want back in this house? You come through it as my son. Nobody else gets to walk in behind you and start measuring the drapes. He looked at me a long moment, and something passed over his face. I hadn't seen there in years, not since he was a young man still living under this roof, still asking me things at this same table, before he'd learned to stop asking and just go along instead. Can I stay here tonight? He said. I don't think I can go back to that apartment, not with her things still in it. Guest room's made up, I said. Your mother kept it that way. Never did stop expecting company. He nodded, and for a while neither one of us said anything else, just sat there with the coffee going cold between us, and the house settled quiet around us the way it settles at night when nobody's arguing in it. And I thought about Rose upstairs in that room all those years, keeping it ready for a son who never once needed it until the night everything he'd built on somebody else's word finally came down around him. The next morning I was up before the sun, same as I've been up before the sun most every day of my life, and I found Jeremy already in the kitchen, standing at the counter in yesterday's clothes, staring at the coffee maker like it was a piece of equipment he'd never once operated. Though he'd grown up in this house watching his mother run it every single morning of his childhood. Filters are in the drawer to your left, I told him, and he found them, and his hands were steadier this morning than they'd been the night before, which told me something about how a man sleeps once the weights finally come off his chest, instead of sitting on it. We hadn't been sitting long with our cups when the phone rang, and it was Wayne, calling earlier than Wayne ever called anybody who wasn't already awake and working. I wanted you to hear this from me before you heard it from anybody else, he said. I filed the report this morning. Adult Protective Services and a separate complaint with the State Licensing Board, the one that oversees Lisa Valencia's certification. What happened with that account and what that woman put on paper and swore to under oath, that meets the legal definition of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, plain and simple. And once I had it laid out in front of me, the way I did last night, I wasn't free to just set it back down and walk away from it. The law doesn't give a lawyer that kind of choice, Kenneth. Not once he's seen it clear as I saw it. I understand, I said, and I did. A man who pours a bad foundation doesn't get to unsee the crack once it's opened up in front of him. He can walk away from the job, but the crack's still there, and sooner or later, somebody's going to step through it. There's more, Wayne said. I made some calls last night after I left your place. Word travels fast in this business, faster than folks like to think it does. Graceful Transitions isn't the only outfit Karen Klein's had trouble with. Once this hits the record, it opens the door for anybody else who's had a run-in with that business to come forward. I already know of one family in Fort Mill asking questions this morning. There may be more. I sat with that a minute, turning my cup on the table the same way Jeremy had turned his the night before, and I found I didn't feel the satisfaction in it I might have expected to feel. Just a tired kind of relief. The way a man feels when a wall he wasn't sure would hold has finally settled into its footing. What happens to her? Jeremy asked from across the table, meaning Lisa Valencia, and I could hear in his voice he already half knew the answer, and didn't much like it. Not because he was defending her, but because some part of him still couldn't quite get comfortable with the size of what his own signature had helped set loose. That's not up to me or you, Wayne said, plenty loud enough for Jeremy to hear it too. That's up to the board that licensed her in the first place, and the record she put her own name to. All I did was make sure the record got where it needed to go. The rest of it moves on its own, same as concrete does once you've mixed the batch. You don't get to reach back in and stop it setting. We hung up not long after that, and Jeremy sat there staring at the table like a man doing arithmetic he didn't want to be doing, and I let him sit with it, because a man's got to carry his own share of a thing before he can set it down properly. The next call came a little past 9, and that one was Marvin, and Marvin's voice had none of Wayne's careful lawyer weight to it, just the plain, easy tone of an old friend who'd spent 30 years explaining numbers to people across a bank counter. Funds are still frozen, same as I left them, he said. But I talked to the manager over at First Carolina this morning, and once Wayne gets you a repayment schedule drawn up on that $47,000, we can set it up as a structured note against the trust, automatic transfer, whatever terms you and your boy agree to. Clean and simple. No need for it to hang over anybody's head like a debt collector's going to come knocking. Appreciate you, Marvin, I said. You didn't have to jump on this the way you did back in March. 40 years I've known you, Kenneth Rogers, he said, and there was a smile in it even over the phone line. You never once asked me for a favor you didn't earn 10 times over first. Freezing an account for an old friend isn't a favor. It's just paying down what I already owed you. Jeremy took the phone from me after that, and I watched my son sit up straighter than he'd sat in weeks and start asking Marvin plain, direct questions about what a repayment schedule would look like, what he could actually afford to carry on a mason's foreman wage without it crushing him flat. And I thought, listening to him, that this was maybe the first grown conversation about money I'd heard my son have in longer than I cared to count. By afternoon, he was on the phone with the venue out past Fort Mill, the barn with the string lights Crystal had picked out. And I sat in the next room and didn't listen close, gave him that much privacy, but I could hear enough of the shape of it, the apologizing, the asking about what could still be recovered on the deposit, the going quiet a long stretch while somebody on the other end read him numbers he didn't like. When he came back into the kitchen, his face had that gray, scraped-out look a man gets after he's had to eat a piece of bad news standing up instead of sitting down. Half the deposit's gone for good, he said. Cancellation clause. The caterer's the same, maybe worse. Some of what they already bought can't be returned. He rubbed a hand down his face. I'm going to owe more than I thought I did. Then you'll pay more than you thought you would, I said. That's the shape a mistake takes sometimes, Jeremy. It costs more once you finally go to settle it than it looked like it cost while you were still spending it. I wasn't saying it to grind him down further. I was saying it because it was true, and because a man needs to hear the truth of a thing plain if he's ever going to carry it right. He nodded and didn't argue the point, which told me something too. Something about the difference between the son who'd have flinched from that same sentence back in March and the one sitting across from me now. I called the relatives too, he said after a while. Aunt Deborah, the cousins, everybody who'd booked a flight. Told them the wedding's off. Didn't give them the whole story. Just said it's off. And that I'd explain more when I was ready to. That's your business to tell or not tell, I said. Not mine to push you on. He was quiet a moment, looking down into his cup. I haven't called Crystal, he said. I don't know if I need to. I think she already knows. I didn't press him on that either. Some doors close themselves, and a man doesn't need to be told twice to leave them shut. It was near evening, the sun starting to lean long and gold across the yard, the way it does in June down here, when I stepped out back to check on Rose's roses along the fence line, the ones she'd babied every summer for going on 30 years. And I found the beds drier than I liked, the mulch gone thin in patches where the heat had been working on it all week, without anybody paying it proper mind. I got the hose going and stood there a while, watching the water darken the soil, thinking how strange it was that a house could hold this much noise and worry in it for 6 straight months. Guardianship papers and drained accounts, and a stranger with a clipboard sitting right there at my kitchen table. And still, underneath every bit of it, the roses hadn't stopped needing water. The grass hadn't stopped needing cutting. The ordinary weight of a house still needed carrying, same as it always had. Jeremy came out and stood next to me at the fence line, hands in his pockets, watching the water same as I was. Mom used to say these roses were more trouble than they were worth, he said. And then she'd spend an hour out here every evening fussing over them anyway. She said that about a lot of things she loved, I said. Said it about me a time or two, if memory serves. He almost smiled at that, the first real one I'd seen cross his face in longer than I could put a number to. And for a minute, we just stood there together, father and son. The both of us looking at something Rose had planted, intended, and left behind for us to keep up whether we knew how to or not. The next call that came in was on Jeremy's phone, not mine, and I could tell by the way his shoulders drew up before he'd even looked at the screen that he already knew who it was. He let it ring twice, standing there at the fence line with the hose still running cool water over Rose's roses. And then he answered it, and I didn't move to give him privacy this time because he didn't step away to take it. He wanted me standing right there. I could hear her voice come through tinny and fast even from where I stood, and I didn't need to make out every word to know the shape of it. Crystal Klein has one register when things are going her way, and another one entirely when they're not, and this was the other one. Jeremy, you need to fix this, she said, loud enough that a bird startled up off the fence post. You need to call that lawyer of your father's and tell him this is all a misunderstanding. My mother's business, Jeremy? Do you understand what you've done to her business? I didn't do anything to her business, Crystal, Jeremy said, and his voice was steadier than I'd heard it in 6 months, steadier than I think I'd heard it in years. You and your mother did that. I just finally stopped being the one holding the ladder while you two climbed up it. There was a silence on the other end, the kind that tells you the person on the other side of it wasn't expecting to be told no, not by him, not ever. After everything I've done for you, she started, and he cut across her, gentle but final. The way a man closes a gate he's finally decided needs closing. You planned a wedding with my father's money without asking him, Jeremy said. You had a woman come into his house and lie about him on a piece of paper so a judge would take away everything he built. I'm not fixing that, Crystal. There's nothing to fix. It's done. So that's it, she said. And I could hear the venom starting to come up under the hurt in her voice. The two of them all tangled together the way they'd been tangled together in her this whole time. 3 years, and that's it. You're just done. That's it, Jeremy said. I hope your mother's all right. I mean that. But I'm not calling Wayne, and I'm not going near that house again. And I'd appreciate it if you didn't call this number anymore either. He took the phone away from his ear before she could get another word in, looked at it a second like it was something he'd only just noticed he was holding, and ended the call clean. Then he put it in his pocket and picked the hose back up like nothing had happened at all, except his hand wasn't quite steady on it, and I let that be because a man's allowed to shake a little after he's finally set down something that heavy. You didn't have to do that in front of me, I said. I know, he said. I wanted to. Figured you'd earned hearing it, after everything. He watched the water a while longer. Feels different than I thought it would. I thought it'd feel like losing something. Mostly it just feels like I can breathe. That's usually how it goes, I said, when the thing you're losing was never really yours to keep in the first place. Feels like grief for about a day, and then it turns into something closer to relief. And most men are surprised how fast that turn happens. We didn't say much else out there. Some things don't need adding on to once they've been said plain. I woke up early again the next morning, same as always, and over coffee I got to thinking about a piece of business I hadn't tended to since March. One I'd been carrying around in the back of my mind the whole time this thing with Jeremy and the courthouse was unfolding, small next to everything else, but not nothing. My mail had been going to a box under Crystal's name for going on 5 months now, ever since she'd walked into that post office back in February and told them she was handling things for an old man who couldn't be bothered to think about his own bills. I'd let it ride because Wayne told me not to touch anything that might look like I was covering tracks before the hearing, and because, if I'm honest, some part of me wanted to see just how far she'd let that particular thread run before it snapped back on her. Well, it had snapped now. So I drove into town that morning, Jeremy staying behind to keep working the phone on the venue and the caterer, and I walked into that post office and stood at the counter and told the clerk plain that I wanted my mail coming to my own address again, in my own name, effective immediate, and that whatever forwarding order had been filed back in February needed to be pulled and closed out for good. She pulled it up on her screen, and there it was, plain as day. Crystal Klein's signature on a form authorizing redirection of Kenneth Rogers' mail, filed the same week those Cedar Grove pamphlets had shown up fanned out on my kitchen counter, like a hand of cards somebody was dealing without asking if I wanted to play. I hadn't seen the actual paper before, only heard about it secondhand from a neighbor who'd mentioned my checks looked like they'd started arriving late that spring, and something in me went quiet and hard looking at it now, the same quiet and hard that had come over me back in March when I first opened that account, and saw what the number had shrunk down to. I'll need you to sign this to reverse it, the clerk said, sliding a form across, and I signed it steady, no shake in my hand at all, and watched her stamp it and file the copy, and that was that. Simple as pulling a nail that never should have been driven in the first place. I stood there a second after, looking at that stamped form, thinking how a man can build something solid for 40 years, a business, a marriage, a house with roses along the back fence, and still have somebody walk in behind him and quietly redirect the small, ordinary threads of his life without him even noticing at first. A bill here, a form there, a pamphlet left where he'd be sure to see it. It isn't the big theft that gets you first. It's the small ones, the ones dressed up as help, the ones that only show their true weight once you finally stop and add them up. Driving home, I passed by the turn that leads out toward Fort Mill, out toward that barn with the string lights, and I thought about Karen Klein sitting in her office right about now, phone ringing with clients backing out one after another, word moving through a small town the way it does. Fast and thorough, and without a bit of mercy for the ones who earned it. Wayne had said there was already a family in Fort Mill asking questions. There'd likely be more by the end of the week. A business built on convincing worried families that their old folks couldn't manage anymore doesn't survive very long once it comes out that the woman running it was willing to manufacture that same worry out of whole cloth to line her own pocket. That kind of business runs on, trust the same way a wall runs on mortar, and once you've shown people the mortar's no good, there's no amount of paint that covers the crack back up. I got home a little past noon and found Jeremy in the kitchen still, phone set down on the counter, looking wrung out but steadier than he'd looked in months, and he told me the caterer had agreed to a partial refund on what hadn't already been ordered. Small mercy, but a mercy all the same. And that his cousin Deborah had called back to say she understood. No hard feelings. Family's family. He'd started making a list on a legal pad Rose used to keep by the phone for grocery orders, and at the top of it, he'd written the word repayment, underlined twice, with the venue and the caterer and the number Wayne was working up listed out underneath in his own plain hand. I want to do this right, he said, tapping the pad. Not just pay it back because I have to. I want you to see me pay it back because I mean it. I'll see it either way, I told him. But I hear the difference in how you're saying it, and it matters to me that you do. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the window looking out at the yard, at the roses coming up thick and stubborn along the fence the way Rose always kept them, and I thought about how much of this last half a year had been spent watching, waiting, keeping quiet while people moved pieces around a board they thought I couldn't see. That watching was mostly done now. What was left was the plainer, slower work of two men figuring out how to be father and son again. One honest conversation and one paid-down debt at a time. And for the first time since that January morning, I stood over Rose's grave. That work felt like something I actually had the strength left in me to do. That evening, once Jeremy had gone up to shower off a day that had worn on him harder than any physical labor ever had, I went out to the back porch and did the one thing I still do most nights. The thing I started doing the week after we buried Rose and never once talked myself out of since. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon into the glass that used to be hers to tease me about. The one with the chip on the rim, she always said, made it mine and mine alone, and I carried it out to the step, where I could see the roses catching the last of the light. I didn't say anything out loud right away. I just sat there and let the evening settle around me the way it does this time of year, thick and green and humming with bugs. And I thought about how many nights over 46 years I'd sat someplace close to this exact spot and told Rose about my day without her having to ask twice. She always said I talked more to her in the garden than I did anywhere else in the house, and she was probably right about that. We made it through, I said finally, quiet, just between the two of us the way it's always been, even with her gone. Wasn't the way I figured we would. Wasn't the way I figured it'd need making it through it all. I turned the glass in my hand and watched the light catch the amber of it. But the house is still standing, Rose. Still got your roses out here doing exactly what you always said they'd do if somebody just watered them and left them be. And the boy's coming back around. Slow. But he's coming. The screen door creaked behind me, and Jeremy came out with his own glass, water instead of bourbon, and sat down on the step next to me without asking if the spot was taken. We hadn't sat out here together like this in longer than either one of us probably wanted to count. You talked to her out here, he said. Not a question. He'd caught me at it more than once over the last 6 months, and never said a word about it until now. Every night I can manage it, I said. Started the week after the funeral. Didn't plan on it turning into a habit. It just did. He nodded slow, looking out at the fence line the same way I'd been looking at it. I used to think that was strange, he said. When I was a kid and I'd catch you out here talking to nobody. I didn't understand it. He was quiet a second. I think I understand it a little better now. After everything this year, there's people you keep a conversation running with, even after they can't answer you back. That's about the size of it, I said. We sat there a while without either of us feeling the need to fill the silence up. That was new too. For 6 months, every silence between us had been loaded with something. An apology. Neither one of us knew how to start. A question neither one of us wanted to be the first to ask. This one wasn't loaded with anything. It was just 2 men on a step at the end of a long day, and that plainness felt like its own kind of gift. Wayne called this afternoon while you were in the shower, I said after a while. Said the report on graceful transitions is moving forward through the state now, out of his hands and into theirs. Said Lisa Valencia's licensing board opened their own file on her separate from it. He didn't sound happy about any of it. Said there's no joy in watching a woman lose a certification she worked years to get, even when she earned losing it fair and square. Jeremy turned the glass of water in his hands. "Do you feel any joy in it?" he asked, and there was something careful in the way he asked it. Like, he wasn't sure which answer he wanted to hear. I thought about that honest before I answered him, because it deserved an honest answer and not just the first thing that came easy. "No," I said, "not joy. I think I felt something closer to that the day Wayne first read me that clause out loud in his office, back before any of the rest of it happened in front of everybody. Felt like a man finding a tool in his own toolbox he didn't remember buying, exactly the tool he needed, right when he needed it most. That's not joy. That's just relief. A thing was built solid enough to hold when the weight finally came down on it. Mom and Dad built it solid, Jeremy said, 16 years ago, before any of us knew we'd need it. Your mother sat across that desk from Wayne, same as I did," I said. "Read every line of that trust twice before she'd sign it. I used to tease her about it, tell her Wayne wasn't going to slip anything past either one of us. We didn't need to read it twice. She told me that's exactly the kind of thinking that gets a man's house taken out from under him by somebody smiling the whole time they're doing it." I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. She was righter than either one of us knew back then. Jeremy looked down at his hands. "I keep thinking about how close I came to signing my name to something that would have taken this place away from you," he said. "Not Crystal's name on the paper. Mine. I'm the one who filed it. I'm the one who stood in that courthouse and put my name under a claim that you couldn't be trusted to run your own life anymore." His voice caught a little on that last part. "I don't know how a person comes back all the way from something like that." "You don't come back all the way from it," I said, plain, because there wasn't any kindness in pretending otherwise. Some things you carry the weight of the rest of your life, and that's just the truth of it, and I'd be lying to you if I told you different. But carrying a weight isn't the same thing as being crushed under it, Jeremy. A man can carry plenty and still walk upright, still do good work, still show up for the people who need him, so long as he's honest about what he's carrying and doesn't try to set it down on somebody else's back instead. I looked over at him. "You showed up today. You called Marvin. You called the venue. You called your cousin and told her the truth instead of some story that made you look better than you were. That's the walking upright part. Keep doing that, and the weight gets easier to carry, even if it never gets all the way light." He nodded, and I could see him turning that over, the way a man does with something that's going to need more than one evening to settle into him proper. "I'm going to pay it all back," he said. "Every dollar. I already told Marvin, I don't care if it takes me 5 years on a foreman's wage. I'm not asking you to forgive a debt that was mine to make and mine to fix." "I know you will," I said. "I wouldn't have let you sit on that step if I didn't believe that." The light had gone from gold to that deep blue color. It turns right before full dark. The kind of evening Rose used to call the good hour, when the heat finally breaks and the whole yard seems to let out a breath it had been holding all day. Jeremy finished his water and stood. Said he was going to turn in early, had an early start at the yard tomorrow, first day back on a real job site, and longer than he wanted to admit. I told him I'd have coffee going by, 6 same as always, and he said he'd be there, and I believed him the same plain way I'd believed him a minute before about the money. I sat out there a good while longer by myself after he'd gone in, finishing what was left in Rose's glass, listening to the crickets start up along the fence line, where her roses stood dark now against the last of the light. Tomorrow the mail would come to the box out front the way it always used to, addressed plain to Kenneth Rogers, no forwarding form standing between a man and his own name anymore. The house behind me was still deeded the same way it had been deeded since 2010, still held inside the trust Rose and I built together, back when neither one of us figured we'd ever need the kind of protection written into it, and it would stay held that way, solid, load-bearing, doing the quiet job it was built to do, whether anybody ever noticed it was there or not. I've laid enough foundations in my life to know a simple truth about them. Nobody ever thanks you for the part of the building nobody sees. They walk across the floor, they lean on the walls, they never once think about what's holding the weight up underneath them. Not until the day something shifts and they finally understand why a man pours it deep and lets it cure slow, instead of rushing it just to get to the parts folks can admire. Rose and I poured this one deep a long time before we ever needed it to hold. And when the weight came down, when everybody standing on top of it thought an old man had gone soft and slow enough to walk right past, it held anyway. It held exactly the way we built it to. I set the empty glass down on the step beside me and looked out one more time at her roses, dark shapes now against a darker fence, still standing, still hers, still mine to keep watered as long as I've got hands left to do it. If there's one thing I'd want you to carry out of all this, it's that the people who love you plain and steady will show it in the small, boring hours, not the loud ones. And the people looking to take something from you will always dress it up as help first. Build what matters to you solid enough and deep enough, long before anybody comes around asking to stand on top of it. Now go on and tell me down in the comments what city you're watching this from tonight. And if this one meant something to you, put a like on it and stay subscribed because there's another story coming and I'd be glad to have you here for it.